Welcome back to video 3 in our series here. Pierre Mitchell and myself, Michael Jansen, are both Chief Research Officers I'm with Everest Group. He's with Spend Matters, and here we're joined by Arco and Andrew from our teams. They're the real subject matter experts on this topic. And we wanted to continue with our conversation. We've previously talked about the enterprise and some of their top views, their context for that. And then we brought down into practices, and now we're going to get into the digital and the digital disruptors and the vendor marketplaces that's coming together.
So great. Well, I'll start it from here. So Michael, thanks. I think one of the things that was really interesting in the Pinnacle study, and I know you guys really cover MSPs and BPOs and just the broader trends on the kind of everything as a service world. I think this issue around kind of MSPs is just an interesting kind of transition over to the digital world, in the sense that MSPs are a really valuable way to kind of just quickly stand up a capability of managing contingent workforce around best practices, and obviously just aggregate, and kind of aggregation of the services and providing that to the enterprise in a much easier way. But when companies are using MSPs, those MSPs themselves increasingly are using very robust technology from standard VMS players and things like that in the market, best of breeds, et cetera. So they are really a vehicle to offer to getting the technology as well. And as companies begin to kind of use that technology and get comfortable with it, they can start saying, okay, to what extent do we want to start using these technologies ourselves and to really drive value? You can really see that difference between the Pinnacle enterprises who are using both the MSPs and also, the technology itself to drive, better outcomes around these kind of major segments of the contingent workforce. So I'm going to hand this over to Andrew, and maybe he can just talk a little bit about this ecosystem on the digital side and explain a little bit kind of what's happening there. So Andrew?
Yeah, definitely. The whole contingent workforce and services ecosystem has been digitizing for some time, but slowly and in a relatively big chunk around VMS, and for about 2 decades. Over the last several years, maybe 5 years, there has been a significant influence of external technology and technology solutions that are coming to bear on the industry, and creating a whole digitization trend that is impacting all parts of the intermediation space, as well as MSPs and VMSs, presenting a challenge to them. There's a whole set of technologies that have been emerging, including new solutions for statement of work, for independent and gigs, direct sourcing, multi-channel sourcing, platform digital ecosystems, and eventually getting to total talent. It's interesting to see how this corresponds to some of the program objectives that were identified in the study. And Arco, I don't know if you want to talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, sure. I mean, as the entire space has evolved, so has the objectives and outcomes that is expected from the contingent workforce. So as part of the Pinnacle research study that we did, it was clear that having the right vision itself is a clear distinction or distinctive element which leads to better outcomes. So things such as, is contingent workforce able to support the strategic or business goals, or focusing very much on the talent aspects itself, better or timely access to talent, or improvement to talent quality, or identifying new sources of contingent talent. These are increasingly becoming more important, and especially for some of the high performance Pinnacle enterprises, vis-a-vis some of the other tactical elements around, say, process efficiency or compliance and spend visibility or spend reduction. These are still very important, but these are sort of going down in the value chain, and that has led to a sort of evolution of the aspects of various various aspects of the contingent workforce. Andrew, you want to speak on that?
Yes, specifically, I'd like to point out that in terms of coming back to the supply chain, the statement of work, these technologies or solutions and models, statement of work and above is still at a pretty early stage. And I think we're starting to see many of the MSPs put their toes into the water. But I think that's kind of the next frontier for them as they try to become multi-channel sourcing, total talent intermediaries. And it's going to be very interesting to see how that progresses and what role they play in ushering in the next generation of contingent workforce sourcing and management solutions.
Yeah, that's a great. I like how you brought in the supply chain into that, Andrew, because it is kind of interesting. Some of these solutions that are now kind of getting into the workforce management and getting into, not just individual, workers from kind of a talent life cycle standpoint, but how are we provisioning, the right, on-demand workforce right into a physical supply chain or the services supply chain, and starting to get into touch on, not just HR and procurement, but getting into, supply chain and operations and crew scheduling and field services. And I guess that's where, the challenge becomes, how do we start to, from an end user and from a business owner standpoint, how do we kind of naturally start to make some transitions from, these kind of existing programs and tools that we have, let's say around staff aug and things like that. How do we, if we're trying to drive some convergence between, pardon me, between, let's say, procurement and HR and all those systems that are out there, how do we make those systems work together? Excuse me. So, Andrew, if you could maybe talk a little bit on the some of the challenges in terms of technology. I mean, I put up a chart here that kind of looked at a study last year from the CPOs who said, in terms of satisfaction of solutions that they've implemented, kind of on the procurement side, contingent workforce is kind of, middle of the pack in terms of the satisfaction that they're getting. And, from what I've seen, and I'd like to get maybe you to weigh in on this, is just some of the issues that you've seen around how do we get them to not just use those systems, a traditional VMS, but how do we start to thread that into our existing source to pay systems, whether it's, SAP Ariba buying Fieldglass, how do we get those integrated, or just, all of the different systems. I think the whole data integration and process integration and kind of how do you make these things all work together from an end user standpoint seems to be, highlighting some challenges. Maybe if you could just talk about some of that.
Yeah, sure. I think that, you bring up a good point about the convergence or the integration of contingent workforce management and procurement. And as you mentioned, we're seeing that play out a bit in some of the solution providers, namely SAP and Coupa. And but that's actually, those are just two data points. And when we look at how those integrations are going, they are in progress, but there's probably a lot of ground to cover. It's one thing to create a single sign-on or front-end P2P integration with a vendor management system. It's quite another thing to have a fully integrated solution where all of the master data is appropriately mapped. And I think that particular area is one that will present challenges. The other question is, we really don't know that much yet about how the market will respond to these integrations. As the study pointed out, HR is very involved in contingent workforce management, particularly with the Pinnacle studies, and in many cases, HR controls it. So I think for enterprises, it's going to begin to raise the question of where should that solution reside, or how should it be configured?
No,
Yeah.
Andrew, I want to just jump in there. I think that's really, and Pierre, you can certainly comment on this, but I think that's really part of our challenge here. We got it sitting at multiple levels here. We got the, how do people value the contingent workforce inside of an enterprise, procurement and HR involvement in that aspect of it, and that's in definite flux. I don't think that's going to be solved in any singular way. But then Pierre and you and Andrew have been talking about the whole market's changing too. So I think that those two things are going to create some continued opportunity for both challenges and solutions here over the next few years.
And it's honestly, it's going to challenge, and it challenges us, too, Michael, and our organizations, right, as we kind of cover these evolving markets. So, I'm sure it's the impact of, digital on, let's say, your peak matrix for MSPs, right, and how you kind of look at the service providers and the impact of digital. That starts, having kind of a major impact. And in fact, on this next slide, when we have our, what we call our solution map, which is kind of like our magic quadrant on steroids, and basically it's a way in which we look at the providers in the market, and we have these across all of both source to pay in terms of 600 plus requirements across 50 plus almost 60 vendors, and we really kind of deep dive it, and the way we look at our dots on the page here are kind of looking at both not just how we evaluate the solutions on that kind of root canal deep dive, and really looking at the solutions and not just on the PowerPoint level, but really driving in deep. But that's like the y-axis. But we also kind of go pure CUSAT. How well is it actually working in terms of customer outcomes and CUSAT for the enterprises? That's the x-axis. So when we kind of look at that, it challenges us because this is our solution map. And by the way, there you can kind of just go to our website and get basically free versions at this high level. You pick kind of the segment that you're interested in. And so for a contingent workforce, we have temp staffing, we have complex services SOW, and we have kind of the direct services, the direct sourcing of workforce and services. And you can kind of pick your own some standard personas that we have, and you can kind of get some plots around the different kind of providers that are out there and in the market. And if you want to dive down and get more details, that's where we can, we have some subscription offerings and whatnot. But it challenges us because we have to look at this whole contingent workforce area and really, which is ultimately about a bunch of services. And that's kind of a spend category view that we need to tie in to our source to pay coverage, because more and more the players in these markets are converging and more deeply integrating. So Andrew, maybe you can just kind of take us home just on a couple, just some comments, just anything of note around on the solution map and kind of what we've seen from the providers in these segments, and either consolidation or anything that you want to touch on before we kind of just wrap up the digital section of this.
Yeah, sure. I mean, we have 3 solution maps, temporary for solutions for temporary staffing, complex services, SOW, direct sourcing of workforce and services. And, the first 2 really come together as what most people would refer to as a VMS solution. But our categories and the state they're in right now, or the solution maps, kind of mirror, I think, what's going on in the industry. So in terms of temporary staffing, we're covering most of the major players, and probably by the end of this year, all of the major players will be in there. But on the one hand, it's the usual characters. On the other hand, we're starting to see some new entrants such as Vindley. In complex services, we're not picking up that much on our radar. There are all of the all of the VMS providers that do offer some form of SOW type of solution, but a large number of those are not participating because of the issues around penetration in their customer bases. So penetration is still quite low for a lot of them. The direct sourcing of workforce and services category, which gets us into, of course, talent pool management and brand. This is where, and that's the chart that we're showing here, this is where we're seeing a lot of activity. we barely have to do anything to get solution providers on the map, and they're coming to us, and this category is going to increase, and I think that all of that really reflects what's going on in the industry.
Okay. All right. So let me bring this to a wrap here. And first of all, I want to thank Pierre. I enjoy these sessions. You and I getting back together for old time's sake, if you will, and bringing in both Andrew and Arco, who have deep expertise in these areas. I think it showcases the challenges that are in the industry, and also showcases some of the capabilities both our organizations are trying to monitor, whether it be at the overall marketplace, it's the enterprise side, or the vendor side, the provider side. We're actively engaged in this, and we're monitoring for rapid change. But Pierre, I wanted to thank you, and you want anything else?
No, thanks, Michael. It's really been a pleasure, and it is a very dynamic and evolving topic area and space. And I know that if we're having trouble covering it, just think about the enterprises that are trying to manage this area. So
we'll put our contact information on the screen there. Feel free to reach out to us, and either one of us, and we'll be happy. And we work together nicely in the industry. So happy to talk to you. Thank you.